Okay, good afternoon. Well, welcome. My name is Jacqueline Rodriguez, and I am the Community Engagement Manager with Toronto Arts Foundation. We're delighted that you're able to join us today for this webinar. I'm going to keep my remarks brief, as my role here today is really as a moderator for our Q&A at the end of the session and to help troubleshoot any technical issues that may arise. As some of you may know, the Foundation is hosting this webinar as part of our Creative Champions Network. Ginny Stolk, our network director, will be giving a brief overview of the program in a few moments for those of you who might be new here and have not heard of it. We do hope for a smooth session, and we're grateful for your patience as we troubleshoot any technical issues that may come up. Second on my list is to just set the proverbial stage for today's webinar. After some introductory remarks, we'll proceed with the presentation, which will take the form of a facilitated conversation. If you have a question for our presenters, please use the Q&A function, not the chat function below at the bottom of your screens. Please feel free to ask a question at any time during the presentation via that Q&A function. We ask that if your question is for a specific presenter, that you identify them in the question to us. We will be addressing questions at the end of today's webinar, and we'll strive to get to as many of those questions as possible, prioritizing the most frequently asked questions. Now, while no one has requested ASL interpretation or any other accommodations for this session, the resources that were circulated will be made available again on our website following today's presentation. And we are also recording today's session. We will make the recording and transcription of the session available as soon as possible following today. With that, I'll turn it over to Ginny, our Creative Trust Fellow and the leader of our Creative Champions Network. Off to you, Ginny.
Thank you, Jacqueline. I'm grateful, as always, for your good work, strong support for everything you do with Creative Champions, and especially your very steady hand on our Zoom technology. Today's webinar, as you said, is the second in our Creative Champions series, providing guidance for arts board members confronting the pandemic. If you were not able to join us for our first session, which was called 10 Principles for Board Members to Follow in These Times, as Jacqueline said, the recording and transcript are now up on the Toronto Arts Foundation's website. And on that same website, you'll also find information on the 27 workshops and learning sessions we've presented over the past 5 years. And there's a rich trove of resources available there, especially chosen to be useful to arts board members. So today, I'm sure you'll all agree that the COVID crisis has definitely concentrated our community's mind. For board members, this is a time that calls for deeper commitment to the organizations you've chosen to dedicate your time, energy, and resources to. It also, I think, has created fertile ground to look with new eyes at the practices and principles for art making and arts governance. Both practically, because things are moving way too quickly to fall back on old ways, and because some of the old ways were probably more out of date than we realized. This is a webinar about organizational resilience, so I thought I should begin before you all enter the chat function with questions about what we're talking about. I thought I would begin by telling you what we mean by that. This is a quote or a series of mashed up quotes about resilience. Resilient organizations are well prepared for change, regardless of the type or magnitude of the transformation an organization may face. The goal of building resilience is to prepare the company for long-term strength and agility. This is a definition from way before the time of COVID-19, but it couldn't really be more to the point today. I think it's always useful to draw Shakespeare into a discussion like this. And as I think he said in Twelfth Night, some are born resilient, some achieve resilience, and some have resilience thrust upon them. Thy fates open their hands, let thy blood and spirit embrace. Well said. It's already possible to begin to identify arts organizations who are responding well to this current crisis with confidence, clear communications, and ideas that feel really appropriate to these situations, or even better, in some cases, ideas that capture the imagination of a public which I think is yearning for innovative leadership at all levels these days. Many of these companies were born resilient or have quickly adopted the lessons of resiliency. We're going to be speaking with two members of such an organization today, Paul Nagpal, the co-chair, and Owais, Lightwala, the managing director of Why Not Theatre. If your organization, like Why Not, demonstrates all or some of the qualities of resilience, I'm sure you're working really hard right now, but with the confidence that your board is doing all that can be done to the best of your abilities to help your organization come through this crisis successfully. If that, however, does not describe how your organization and board have been functioning, there's no time for regrets right now. Resiliency has been thrust upon you. Now's the time to look clearly at how you can bring all the energy, good ideas, and compassion you can find to the table. Remember, it is the board's role to support and protect the mission and sustainability of your company. Celia Smith is the second person who's going to be speaking today. She's a leader of many arts organizations. She's the incoming Interim CEO of Luminato Festival, and she co-founded the Leadership Emergency Arts Network, which is currently bringing the experience of Canada's senior art leaders to assist those working in companies who are struggling to resiliency into their futures. Just before we begin, I think that it's a good time to reflect on the fact that many people before us and around us have been challenged in existential ways. The land we're speaking from has been a site of human activity for 15,000 years and has been the traditional home and territory of many First Nations people. We live, work, learn, struggle, and share on this land as they have done before us. Thank you, everybody. So shall we begin a discussion about resiliency? I have a few questions for Paul and Owais, but I wanted to just begin by saying that Why Not Theatre has, from the time it was founded 13 years ago by Robbie Jane, and I remember it well, has defined itself as challenging the status quo, questioning everything about what a theatre company can be, rethinking how stories are told, and who gets to tell them, forcing doors open, inventing, encouraging, and building a creative community. Paul, you are co-chair of the board, and I would like to ask you, what has this meant for how the board functions and understands its role?
Sure, that's a great question. I think, for all who may or may not know Why Not already, it's all about creating amazing work. And I think one of the key things that we've always thought about was to make sure that we had them helping think about what else is that they should be thinking about beyond just that artistic capability. For us, we always said, we're not trying to change the art. We're not trying to help them on that side. I think from a board point of view, it's hey, keep up the good work, to looking more at what else should we be thinking about? How do we stay more resilient? How do we continue to thrive, even prior to this pandemic, but through this now, looking at how do we start to make better decisions? How do we continue to think through into the future as well? I'll put it actually over to Owais actually to chat a little bit more about kind of the way we think about things from the management team point of view, and then I'll kind of add on with the leadership as well.
Owais,
yeah, just to say,
what's more?
To build on that point that Paul has made about kind of our understanding of the board's role, I think it really is encapsulated well in this anecdote. There was a moment a few years ago when we were still pretty early in our growth, when we first had enough money. It was just, the company was just myself and the artistic director, Robbie Jane, and we had finally gotten a little bit of operating funding, and we decided that we should finally get salaries instead of doing this work for free. And we presented the board a budget and said, this is what we'd like to pay ourselves. And I remember Paul saying to us, and is that what you'd like to make? And I said, it's what we can afford. And he said, that's not what I asked. And I think that spirit of asking us the questions that we don't even give ourselves permission to ask ourselves, by taking this role of custodian and supporter rather than ever feeling like they were our boss, ever feeling like we had to serve their vision. They were very much coming to us, tell us what your vision is, and also let us help you protect yourself and do it in a way that manages risk in a way that's sustainable and responsible, so that you succeed rather than us succeeding or any idea that we have of success being the priority.
Yeah, I would say that, it's a combination of the leadership team as well as the board. We don't have a separate goal. We don't have a separate vision compared to them. It's supporting them for success, right? And putting our trust and all our strength into them to say, we know what you're doing. We appreciate that and we love that. And how do we help support you continue to thrive?
So there's very much a common culture that runs between the studio, the staff, and the board, which is good. So what type of individuals do you look for to bring onto the board? Do you have, there must be special personal characteristics as well as professional expertise that you've got in mind when you're searching for people to ask to join?
I think it's exactly what you said about the consistency of culture across the organization. So just in the same way, we were very deliberate in building the company, which started with just Ravi 13 years ago, and now has a team of we were 9 full-time and 8 today, but that team has been built very carefully to share an entrepreneurial culture. A spirit of innovation is built into every member of the team, and that was very true of the board that we built as well. So one thing we kind of eschewed a little bit was we didn't really go with the standard role-based board fulfillment that a lot of people do, where you have the one accountant, the one lawyer, the et cetera, and was very much led by trying to figure out, first of all, the biggest priority was value alignment, and are we on the same page in terms of our spirit, our culture, and what we're trying to achieve, and then figuring out what roles mean in terms of perspective, in terms of skill set, in terms of thinking that we don't have in our team that can be supplemented by people with other experiences, with other perspectives. And so the board in a lot of ways mirrors the organization as culture, but also looks very different from the organization because it's trying to bring diversity to our thinking, not more of the same. I would say that's kind of been the overall strategy, and it's been very, very slow. We've been very careful about bringing on board members because we just like all of our staff and all of our artist relationships, for us, the emphasis on relationships over transactions has meant that we've been very careful about who we are working with and really understanding each other rather than trying to get to any kind of predefined idea of success, which is, oh, you have to have a board of 10 really important people, or you have to have this much money that your board gives you before you can call yourself a real org. And instead of thinking of external benchmarks like that, it's been more about like, does this relationship work? Does this feel like the right fit? Are we are we working the same direction, or is there a difference in our vision?
Yeah, and I think we spent a lot of time with every new potential member before we bring them on. We really look at, as Owais said, the values that they bring to the table, not necessarily the kind of the functional skill set, but also that entrepreneurial spirit, right? And that understanding that in this type of organization, in the arts world, it's not a linear path. It's not going to be pretty straightforward. Things are continuously change. There's risks that they have to jump into. And we as a board have to be very comfortable with that. So when we looked at additional board members as we continue to grow and adapt, it was making sure that they really understood the vision and the desires of the organization. And of course, Ravi and Owais and Kelly have been extremely ambitious in what they want to do. But so we have to be there to support that and not just kind of tamper that down and change that vision.
Really important. But Paul, your day job is in finance. You work with chief financial officers in the corporate world. And I just wonder how does the board manage to both embrace and at the same time mitigate risk? And are there any things that you've learned from your experience with Why Not that kind of carry over into your other work with corporate financial offices?
No, it's a great question. I think you're right. It goes back and forth. So the types of things that I was looking at, with my corporate perspective, bringing to the table, ensuring surplus of funds, ensuring that we had at least 3 months of operating funds available, starting to build out a reserve fund, trying to do these things that, ensure that sustainability of an organization as they go through tough times where there may be minimal or zero revenue. So that's the type of things that we started putting in place, and really coming in and saying, how do we grow this organization as well? So pre-pandemic, we looked at this as a high-growth startup, right? They were scaling, they had great ideas, there was not a lot of opportunities. So for us, it was like, how do we continue to support an organization like that? From a risk point of view, of course, we have to be comfortable. There's this fine balance between creating amazing work and spending an inordinate amount of time building something, and understanding that there will be twists and turns along the way before that gets to stage, and before you see that end result. So it's being comfortable with that, at the same time putting in the fiscal responsibilities of, do we have the funds, will we be able to maintain a certain amount, and how do we grow from there?
Right. Slightly different perspective and emphasis from the board and from the staff leadership, but all going in the same direction. So I have a question for either or both of you. What particularly about those ways of working and thinking that you just described are being kind of brought to the fore, are highlighted in the company's response to the pandemic? Maybe Owais should say that.
Yeah, covering the vaccine, I think, was the smartest thing we did. It made it a lot easier. I'm totally kidding. We don't have vaccines.
Good for you.
That joke though maybe is like we are also like very much in a form of crisis. And I think to your point, like nothing has changed about our organization significantly in that we were always very responsive and built to be nimble. We created a structure very intentionally because we came up in a time of scarcity. We came up before the County Council doubled its budget, at a time where every level of funding constantly telling us there's no new money, there's no new money. So, we built a digital first infrastructure. We didn't have an office for many, many years. We still don't have a venue, and we're never going to get one because that capital heavy model doesn't really work in the financial economics of today. And so by avoiding some of those structures and creating new structures out of necessity, we've positioned ourselves to be able to respond to this crisis the same way we respond to every year that we make a plan, which is we don't do a season ever, because we have never been in a position where for us, consistency has been less important than really figuring out where the right impact is, where's the right positioning, where's the place where we should be right now, rather than trying to go, we did this last year, so we must do that now this year and then do a little bit more of it next year. So that's I think the attitude towards planning, towards long-term planning, towards a kind of what is it that a company is supposed to be doing, and that's been consistent since pre-crisis and post, and has helped it make it not as difficult for us as I think some of our peers.
Yeah, sure. Paul, unless you had something to add, I had one final question for the two of you. Have you found it possible to continue your commitment, which has been very strong and very significant, to sharing resources and removing barriers to other artists, to other producers in this time of crisis? How are you thinking about that aspect of, that important aspect of your work?
So a couple of thoughts from my point of view, and then I'll turn it over to Owais as well in terms of specific activities that are happening right now. Understanding that this has been a huge financial hit for our organization, as well as pretty much every arts organization. Budgets had to be cut dramatically, and there's a lot of uncertainty to when theaters will be able to open, and when will people want to sit in seats side by side, in a 100 or 1,000 person venue, to see what that looks like and feels like. So really spending time thinking about what does theater look like going forward. I think too many people are saying, well, when do we get back to the norm? You know, when do things just go back to normal? When do we open again? And I think it's important to understand that there will be a new norm. It isn't just going back to the way it used to be. We now need to be thinking about, okay, what's coming up next? You know, what can we start to do that will work within the time frame, but then in the future as well, what sort of activities should we be doing that will accommodate the new norms that we're going to be more comfortable with and expecting actually from an audience point of view.
Okay. Owais, did you have one last thought to share with us there?
Oh, a last thought. Maybe the last thought.
Oh, well, there'll be more. Just now.
Just on this question. One example actually of a programming, we'll be announcing this program soon. It's called This Gen Fellowship. It's a mentorship program we created for BIPOC female or female identifying artists. That was national in its original intention, and then COVID hit us just before we were about to announce. So we had picked out some mentees, but we hadn't figured out who their mentors were, and we hadn't figured out what the delivery was fully. But the original intention was that they were national artists and they were going to do placements across the country. And then responding to the crisis, rather than it again being a limitation for us, where we were obviously those people couldn't go and work in any physical building anymore. They couldn't spend time with their mentors. We expanded the program, took advantage of this opportunity to make it an international mentorship. And now the collaborations that those mentees are getting are really high level international people as well as national people, because that's what digital offers us. So it's about this spirit that Why Not, I think, has always had in our work, which is there is no such thing as a kind of good or bad anything. There's just what works in this context and what doesn't. And rather than fighting against it, we kind of went, this is what the terms are now. So this is how we're going to take advantage of this opportunity, and changing the shape of our programming as quickly as we need to without losing our values, without losing the reason why we do things, which is more than just, the act of putting on plays.
Great segue. Thank you both. I am going to move to Celia and ask her a few questions. Celia Smith, not every arts organization has been as consciously built around resiliency as Why Not? But yet most, I think, have been in the process over the past few months of finding new ways of creating and connecting within an incredibly accelerated time frame. How, in your experience, has this changed the ways boards are being called on to help their companies respond quickly and effectively to the current crisis?
Thanks, Ginny. I just should say at the outset, since I'm supposed to do like the downside of this, because those two are superstars. So
no.
I serve on many arts boards. I have in the past. I'm also, as Ginny said, one of the co-founders of Leadership Emergency Arts Networks, where I'm working sort of indirectly with a couple hundred arts organizations across the country. So you can take my remarks as very much generalizations. So please don't try to find any companies specifically in the anecdotes I might tell you. And some of our advisors are actually on this call. So nice to see you guys. Well, I was thinking about this. I think my observation in the last month is boards kind of find themselves in one of three categories right now in their relationship to the organization and the situation. They are either absent, and that is absolutely the case in a very high proportion of boards at the moment, possibly because they are distracted with the free fall in their own lives or businesses or health or whatever, or they don't know what to do. So they're absent, and the leaders of the organizations have forgotten they have a board. And actually, it's easier just to make these decisions by themselves because then they don't have to explain everything. So you're off the hook and you are not participating. Secondly, that you're present in the normal way. You know, you're showing up to meetings and you're present and you're trying to do your normal role, but your normal role isn't needed at all right now because we're actually not in active fundraising. We're not in active marketing. We're actually, even the financials are, kind of straightforward. You just cut all those lines out. So there's not a whole lot to discuss really because we're not producing. And And then the third group, which is a minority, but is quite powerful, is board members who are omnipresent, who are actually over-involved, and in some cases bullying executive leadership and artistic leadership to do the stuff that they think should happen. So why haven't you applied for that wage subsidy yet? And why don't you know what that $500 gazillion is that the federal government is giving to the arts sector? Why aren't you applying for it yet? Well, it's actually not even open yet as a program, so I can't. Thank you for your idea. You know, so I think also coming from a position of anxiety, like I'm feeling so helpless, I'll go overboard in my pressure on the leadership. So clearly none of those three are actually acceptable. I'm sure there's a fourth beautiful harmony, which is actually what these guys have presented. So actually there are 4 categories. You guys are in the 4. So I was thinking about, you know, I think what this stage is called ad hoc governance, because the governance rules we normally would expect of a resilient organization or the rest of us, who are not quite as great at that, you know, is fairly structured, and we know what our roles are, and we have the list of the 10 things we're supposed to be doing. But this is requiring different kind of governance. You need to be risk assessors. So whether you form a risk committee or whether that becomes part of the whole board's job or whatever, you suddenly become people who need to assess risk and advise leadership about risk. And that usually isn't generally in your portfolio. If you're a larger group and you have an executive committee and you're a regular board member, you usually just let the executive committee sort of, you know, take care of the tough stuff. In this case, you actually have to show up as a regular board member and participate in the tough stuff. And, you know, that's usually not your role. The standing committees that you usually sit on, fundraising, finance audit, maybe there's a marketing and programming thing. I don't know, maybe there's some other ones. Those actually aren't really needed right now. If you have those meetings, you're going to be wondering, why am I even wasting my time? Why are we talking about nominating? Nobody wants to talk about that right now. That's not the highest priority. So those things are all kind of not necessary at the moment. You're finding that weaknesses in the organization are exposed, but the strengths are also appearing. And you didn't have to think this way before as a board member. The life of the organization was not under the microscope normally at board meetings, and now it is. So, and your assessment, frankly, of your staff leadership and their capacity, you maybe haven't thought this hard about it before. You might be in awe of what they're doing, or you might be really worried. So that's all completely different than what we usually have to do when we show up as board members, you know.
Well, maybe not completely. What I've found is that each board is different from every other board, as each arts organization is different from every other arts organization. But those are the things, those are the troubling things, the more challenging things that some of us have been finding. For sure that these days, the new ways of delivering the mission of an arts organization, they definitely do seem to require boards to govern from a position which hopefully they governed from previously, but maybe not, a position of strength, of trust, of speed, of courage, and ferocious commitment to the art and to the mission and to the artists. So do you have any thoughts on how people are rising to those expectations and frankly needs these days?
Well, I think it's obvious from Paul and Owais, if an organization already has a really clear vision and reason for being, and everyone is there because they're actually supporting that kernel of what the art is and what the purpose of this organization is and what you're trying to accomplish, then as all of that has sort of literally been taken away during this time, if you know what that is, then it's going to be easier to stay on mission. If that was vague to begin with, and there are many organizations who can't remember why they exist. They haven't gone back to first principles for so long. They exist because someone keeps giving them money to continue, and it's July, so we're doing this, whatever we're doing, right? So if that's the kind of organization that you're part of, and that is taken away, then you really are wandering in the wilderness right now. So you can be ferocious and courageous and love your ED, but if you actually haven't addressed that, then then you have an issue. So I think this is an opportunity. I mean, in some cases, for some organizations who have a very hard time having any legitimate activity for the next several months, this isn't the case for everybody, but for some, there's really nothing you physically can do. And you haven't been able to figure out how you're translating digitally, successfully. It's a time for a regroup. It's a time, to get back to those first principles, because if you do that and really solidify around something, then you'll go forward. And if you can't, the chances are you actually won't be going forward, because not everyone is going to make it through this. And those organizations that have a very clear indication of what they're doing, why they're doing it, for whom, and it's centered around the work, have a chance in this.
And that's always what we hope and expect and talk to people about. Those of us who run arts board networks, for example, those are the sorts of things that we encourage and emphasize. And many professional executive directors and managing directors are determinedly following or encouraging those attitudes and ways of working in their organizations. It seems to me that there might be a particular sort of individual board experience, expertise, but maybe it's really values that are most needed and that managing directors are most looking for at this time.
Mm-hmm. I think some of you mentioned these things before, but like right now, what organizations they need, like your highest capacity of intelligence and of generosity and empathy and compassion for this situation. They also need you to be really flexible, because they're going to present you with something, and next week it's going to be different. I mean, that's how this whole month has gone, right? Every week we have, oh, I get it. Now we can't do that. And any scenario planning you're doing, I mean, you can do on certain conditions, but you can't even really do on dates anymore. We used to think that June was possible, or maybe September, or now January. Well, no, I'm not even thinking January looks so hot, right? So the flexibility and a spirit of innovation and collaboration is really what's going to be necessary. And boards that are distant or aren't paying that much attention, so you're not actually getting the nuance, are going to be in trouble. I've been in discussion with a few organizations about how often do we have to meet. And in some cases, people think, I think actually we have to meet every week, even if it's just for 30 minutes, otherwise you're going to lose the train of where we're going. And when we meet 6 weeks from now, it'll take us 9 hours to have a meeting to get you up to speed on us. And actually, I need your input all the way along. In other situations, EDs are saying, actually, I don't think I actually have any bandwidth to actually prepare, report to, discuss with the board. I'm just going to keep them like away for a little while I figure out what on earth I'm going to do, and then I'll bring them in. I mean, obviously, I don't think that's the strongest approach, but it might be the most practical one, in that situation.
Interesting words to choose. Report to. First of all, I'm still a believer in September, but I'm also a believer in the necessity at this point that report to is not the way things are getting done,
exactly,
but by discussing and problem solving collaboratively. That's working. Report to, I think, might have a little bit more relevance and importance when we're talking about the finances. I mean, somebody, hopefully everybody, somebody on the board, somebody or many people on staff are taking a really close look, I hope, at what the finances look like. At the very least, I think we want to be prepared for what's coming in the future. We want to understand what the situation is. We want to be able to carefully think it through in terms of what that means for what we do now. And we also want to, I think, really understand where we're going to be at come September or pre-holiday blowout of theater productions. I don't know what it's going to look like, but the finances do seem to be an area where board input, where board expertise, where board understanding is is very important.
Yeah, I think, I mean, right now, everyone's combing through on the expense side, obviously, to make sure that you're only spending the things you really need to spend, because you'll be happy later that you didn't spend it now, because we're going into a cold winter next year. It's you know, regardless of whether we're performing or not performing, it's going to be very hard. You know, in many cases, depending on the timing of your year, in many cases, companies, you know, you've raised the money, and in some cases, people were not in full production, so they're actually in a little bit of a decent spot now. But as you go forward, it's just expense, and so obviously people are combing through the expenses and figuring that side out. And on the revenue side, if we're not producing and performing, that's easy to cross out box office. The real risk, and hopefully the councils can sustain their funding and possibly flow additional funding through. So that's, you know, that's obviously but if, as Owais was mentioning, if you didn't get a very significant portion of your resources from government, someone said to me yesterday, it's the entrepreneurial among us are being punished. Because those of us who actually found other sources of revenue and set up social enterprise options, and we're looking at alternatives, and we're less dependent on government, have less security now. So that's actually the flip of obviously what we really wanted. That needs to be addressed in some of the funding. Anyway, the risk line in all these budgets is the fundraising line. And again, those who were very successful at doing that are possibly also the ones that are going to suffer, because you're really dependent on private support. And that's really anyone's guess, depending on what your profile is of your donors, what that looks like next November. So that's the line that really, when all is said and done, you know, if you have competent management, everything else is pretty clear. But that fundraising line is the line that board members can influence and will have an opinion on, and maybe can help forecast.
It really comes down to those people who have been committed to your organization, who deeply believe in it, and who really seriously do not wish it to go out of existence because of the pandemic. And I would just guess that for most organizations, that's not all their donors, but hopefully it's some. And the board's role in connecting with those people, I think, could be really, really important. So Celia, did you have any thoughts that you wanted to leave us with before we go on to a more general discussion and take some questions? And I have a few overview questions, maybe in case we aren't getting enough questions from our listeners.
Okay, just one little thought. I mean, obviously, I'm an optimist. I wouldn't have survived this long in this sector if I wasn't. And I think that, you know, the things that we have demonstrated every day for all of us who've been active in this as volunteers or as workers, creators, those attributes are going to serve us very well in this crisis, because everything we do is a team sport. You know, none of us do any of this stuff by ourselves. We've always worked with others to do it, to be successful. We naturally are all creative people, whether that's our job or not. We're all creative people. We have a really strong sector with some really brilliant people in it. And our citizens need us. Our citizens really need us. So I don't know why we wouldn't take this tragic opportunity to really put our best feet forward collectively. I think it's a huge opportunity for us to really share our value with the country.
I agree. And I, for one, am missing going to theater, dance, music performances immensely, just immensely. So I'll be back as soon as the theaters are open, I can assure you, hopefully me and many others like me. Jacqueline, do we have some questions from people who are listening in that we can put forward right now?
We sure do. We have 3 questions right now on the docket. And so I encourage any other attendees, if you have questions, get them in now, since we're about 15 minutes away from ending. Our first question isn't attributed to any particular presenter. The question is, does the current situation require that boards take a greater role in finding ways to deliver the performance or art during the pandemic?
Huh. Oh, Owais.
I think for me, the job of the board is to support the people who do the work, not to be the people who do the work. So for me, the question of what is the art, how is it going to get delivered, what is the best way to make the impact the mission is meant to make is what we have staff for, and they're the experts of that. And I think one thing that like I have really valued about our board is that they trust our expertise in that, and their job isn't to necessarily come up with the solutions, but it's to help us find the solutions and make sure we've considered everything in what the solution could be, but not to be the expert. And that applies more now than ever, because nobody knows anything more than anybody else about what the future is. Like literally no one knows anything at all. So how could there's no sense of significant expertise to be offered anymore. And the people who've been doing it on the ground I think is going to be where the answers to that are going to come from.
And the response to what they're putting out there in the world, what the artists are putting out there in the world, which is a lot, a huge amount actually. Did you want to add anything to that, Paul or Celia?
Just very, very quickly, I would say, 100% agree with Owais. I think the board is there to support them and help them think through financial implications, risk implications, things like that. But exactly that, we're not the creative, we're not there to define what that art is. We have trust in the organization and in the team.
Okay, next question. Are legacy practices still relevant? How do we embrace the new normal?
I love this question. The definition of legacy is literally something that is outdated. That's what that means. And to me, the idea that legacy practices would ever be accepted as normal speaks to the sector-wide addiction we have to same old, and the fear of innovation that I think is endemic in our community.
And is that on the board side or on the staff side or on the artistic side?
Everywhere. We're all there. It's much more infectious than COVID and much more fatal.
There are no antiques at Oasis House, okay, if anyone's questioning that. I mean, I think you're on the right track. I've been thinking about this. Now we're all like thrust into the digital world, right? It's not like we haven't been there for 10 years or more. Of course we have been, and what's amazing is how quickly we've all adapted to trying to replicate our lifestyle through this format rather than the one that we're used to. So I think I agree with you. I mean, I think obviously there's no point looking backwards. You can't forget the stuff that's actually valuable and good. And, obviously we're not, ditching everything that's behind us, but if you're not actually adapting, then in every part of your life in general, then, why bother getting older? Like, why bother continuing?
Sad sobbing is all that's left if you're not adapting. Jacqueline, is there another question for us?
Yes, we have two more currently. The next question is challenges, I think, something that was said earlier. Curious as to why you feel that it may not be a great time to attract or recruit new board nominees. Media keeps saying people are bored at home. Perhaps talent on the sidelines are waiting to contribute and just need to be approached with the right ask.
That's interesting.
If that's a possibility, I mean, certainly if you have people that you've been courting and that, know and love you, and maybe they're halfway through the process that Paul and Owais spoke about, why wouldn't you do it? People actually, don't you find that you ask people to meet and they're ready, like in 45 minutes they can talk to you? When it used to be like, oh, I'll talk to you 3 weeks from now, and now it's like, oh, I'm speaking to you now. People are more available. We're not commuting. I think that actually helps, and people are more open and available. So for sure. I just think broad, prospecting for new people when you don't have any work to acclimatize them to what you're doing and actually show legitimately who you are, and we are preoccupied with other personal things going on, that might be challenging.
But let me add something to that, because I think this is a time when a board might not have all of the experience or the energy to contribute to new projects, new online work, new plans for the future. But it probably is a really, really good time to bring people to the table for particular purposes, to help think through a project, to help, make a couple of specific fundraising asks around something new and important that you're doing, to help with communications, because every core staff and core board, in my experience, are overwhelmed with the work that they have to, think up and put into place and deliver effectively right now. So on my board, we are looking for people who were previously involved, or people who have expressed interest, or people who have been involved, as stakeholders in the past, but are actually deeply devoted to the organization. And I think that's going to work out really well. I'm going to ask a question of all of us. Do we think that this current situation and the new types of demands and expectations and desires of board members to help in different ways than they might have been used to when they met around the board table every 2 months. Do you think that the board's role and our expectations will change, and that some of our basic understandings of good governance might actually undergo a significant change in the future?
My answer to that would be, it depends on what the existing board looks like and feels like. I think boards are definitely going to have to be able to embrace more uncertainty, really getting comfortable with the risk that's involved, which has now just been completely changed, and looking at the different risks that exist for arts organizations, both from a fundraising point of view, from a fiscal point of view, how that art will be delivered in the future. It's not about predicting the future. It's about trying to understand stability and what that could look like, and sustainability. So having some understanding from a fiscal point of view, obviously very important for all boards, but really understanding what risk, what uncertainty looks like, and being able to manage that and help the team and the management team really understand that as well.
So you're really saying that every board in future should be in conscious way looking to making their organization more resilient and contributing to that, and how they function and how they provide the support that the organization needs. Is that what you're saying, Paul?
It's unfortunate if boards weren't providing that already. Going forward, 100% that's necessary.
But I think a lot of boards in our sector, to like ending anybody, like, we're not built for that, which seems like such an obvious necessity for a board, is to prepare your organization in a way that's resilient to change. And I think some of the contributors to that are funding structures that have for a long time incentivized conservation and preservation over innovation. And it has led to a tendency for boards to respond in kind by becoming risk averse. So I think some of this, like, I find it really interesting. What is the normal that we say is going to change? And that expectation that resilience would not be part of the job description is interesting to me, because for us, we were always precarious. We were always in very, very uncertain waters. And we had a board that supported growth as the only way out of uncertainty, because if you didn't have a growth plan, you were going to die. And that I think is interesting, the difference in the legacy part of our sector and some of the other parts of the sector that have different models.
I think that came to the organization itself. We treated it like, the comparable is a tech startup, right? It was a young organization, constantly growing, pivoting, changing, adapting to the needs of the community, and saying, how do we continue to grow and scale within this uncertainty? So that's how we as an organization and as a board have always kind of treated it, to say, great, there's uncertainty. What do we do? How do we continue to thrive?
We have another question here, Ginny. It's specifically been directed for Celia. Celia, what is your sense of how we should be engaging with private patrons or donors at the moment in organizations that rely heavily on that resource for fundraising?
Mm-hmm.
Well, I think every day is a day to support fundraising for these organizations. This is a constant relationship. It's not just the day that you ask people for money, it's every day that you've invited them into the organization and they're a participant in it. So that's how you should see these donors. I mean, right now would not be the time that I would ask for a new major gift, but I would certainly nurture those relationships that we already have and be in touch and understand their point of view and, you know, what's going on in their lives and you know, try to figure out when is the time that we're going to talk about your further commitment to the organization. And that they know, especially if you've got some major principal corporate or individual donors, you know, who are significant, that they understand what's going on the inside. Not that you tell them the worst, most scary bits, but you tell them, you know, the truth about what's going on so that they're a participant in wherever you're headed, because your future, as Owais says, is going to look different than your past. And they were funding your past. So you need to kind of bring them along and bridge them through this period. If you don't speak to those people until October, they're going to go like, I guess I didn't matter to you. I'm not saying you're calling them every day because they've got other things to deal with, but that you're thinking about them, that relationship. How are you dealing with them? Do they know what's going on? Are you seeking their advice about anything? Are you, you know, telling them about a fork in the road? You know, are you letting them participate however you're disseminating your work right now? You making sure that they actually feel special in the way you're sharing it with them. Because as Ginny said, if you're lucky, you have people who are crazy about you. And so you just need to keep nurturing that. If you're not that lucky and you don't feel you have that relationship with your donors currently, maybe now would be a time to start trying to nurture that, because you're vulnerable. They did support you at some point. They made a decision to support you. Maybe on the basis of that, you could try to nurture something. When we all go back into active fundraising remains to be seen. I'm not saying there aren't some specific sort of one-off ones you might do, but it remains to be seen. And in terms of the corporate sector, I think, you know, frankly, they don't even know what their envelopes are going to be going forward. So again, there are relationships to be managed, but the actual discussion about the specifics of the future funding, if you don't have to do that right now, I would say that maybe is a bit on hold.
So I look a little bit on the bright side here. In two ways, I think that the various funders, the arts funders, have been terrific in their understanding of what's going on, stepping up to the plate, trying to do what they can do to make things possible for their arts organizations. So I do think that that they're doing important things, and equally so the government. I mean, it's quite interesting to see the sorts of care and detail with which they're forming programs that are going to be useful to artists as entrepreneurs and to us as small businesses, small nonprofits. But I also just wanted to say that I had mentioned briefly before the idea that there are some organizations who are responding really creatively, like really energetically, and capturing of their own audiences and the community and people out there in the world. And I think that optimistically, you know, with all the downside and the challenge, there's also an opportunity to get people involved in your energy, in your new ideas, in your new ways of going at things, and in your courage. I think courage is a hugely important word these days for all of us to keep in mind. Who else, Jacqueline?
That is actually it, and we are a minute to 1 o'clock, and I know one of our presenters needs to jump off, so perhaps we leave things there.
One word. I do want to make the point that cultural diversity in general, on a board, in an organization, in our city, in our world, is a source of resilience and adaptability to change. And I think that contains a message to Toronto's arts community, to the business community, to our community overall, that different ways of thinking, different backgrounds, different approaches, all of that, that you get on a diverse board, that you get within a diverse organization, that you get from actively reaching out to diversify your audiences, I think that is a component of resilience. And I think it's really important to keep front of mind for all of us. I don't know, when everything's back to normal, we should get together again and talk about, have we gone back to business as usual? In what ways have things changed? Because I think it's going to be really, really interesting. And as I said, looking on the sunny side, I'm kind of excited about it, I have to say, even though it's terrifying and horrible. So thank you so much to everybody. Jacqueline, are there sign-off things that I'm supposed to be saying that I'm forgetting to say? I don't know.
I would just say that we are planning a third session on this topic. And beyond that, we will be sending out a quick survey that we encourage everybody to fill out. And thank you so much.
I had a great time with this discussion. Thank you all. Really, really good and really interesting.
Thank you for all your work, Ginny, in planning it and the discussion and moderating, and Toronto Arts Foundation for hosting.
Yeah, thank you.
Our pleasure. Our total pleasure. Bye, everybody. And thank you for coming in and joining us.
Thank you.